All right. Well, welcome, Ariel, to this very first interview that I've ever done for
Mm.
YouTube. I'm so nervous and excited to talk to you about Alexander Technique, and I just want to thank you so much for coming to talk to me and to the YouTube family over here in the
Mm.
world. And I'm really excited to learn from you and for you to talk to us about what Alexander Technique is. And it's been really helpful for me as a musician to know a little bit about it. I know it's not just for musicians, but to just have a little meager understanding of it is just so very helpful. So I guess I wanted to just start out with asking you about yourself and what it is that you do.
Mm. Amber, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so thrilled to be part of this project and to help you launch it. It's very exciting. And thank you for the opportunity to share a bit about myself and my work. My studio is Alexander Technique Philadelphia, and I've been teaching here in the Philadelphia area since 1988. What I do is I help people. I help people change how they think about their own movement so that they can function at their best and feel the best they possibly can. So it's really a tool to reach our full potential. Now, I've been helping musicians, especially, mostly through the Curtis Insitute of Music and now also the Boyer College of Music at Temple University, and in my private practice. So I've really created this little niche to help musicians, which I love helping musicians because I love music and I'm also an artist. So I discovered Alexander Technique as a young dancer, and I was gobsmacked in the middle of a workshop because the teacher helped me balance on one leg better. Now, dancers spend a great deal of time training to do that, and I had been working super hard, and I wasn't very good at it, which is frustrating. That happens a lot when we pursue a technique, whether it's musical technique or juggling technique. Sometimes we work super hard at it and we make it worse because we don't understand all that we need to understand. And so, what I do is I help people understand how they're actually built to move so they're not trying to work against that. And I help them with their mindset. So, Alexander Technique is a toolkit about our mind body connection and that balance, because when we're in good balance, everything works better. So, I help musicians, and I also help seniors, I help athletes, I help people with back problems because so many people have back and neck and shoulder issues, and they don't always understand that it's how they're operating their system, how they're moving, that's actually causing or at least keeping them in those pain patterns. So it's a little bit like a mind body tune up, is what I do.
That's interesting. I'm kind of curious. This thought occurred to me that it might be fun for us to have you give some tips for those of us that are sitting while they're listening, and then maybe we give some tips for those of us that might be, driving in the car or about their day to just kind of understand more about what it is. Because I know that you're not a big fan of the word posture, right? Because that would maybe imply being forced into working hard to maintain a pose, right? But I would just love for those of us maybe to experience what Alexander Technique is. Maybe we can talk about how would be a good way to sit, for example.
Yeah, well, I think a lot about posture because a lot of Alexander teachers do avoid the word, but I did a TED talk all about posture myth busting because my point is that the way most of us think about posture, what we've been taught about posture, really is not truthful, it's not accurate, and most importantly, it's not helpful. So, the myth busting, the first most important thing about sitting is don't try to sit still. Even with something like meditation, where we wouldn't want to be kind of swaying or moving or wiggling, if we're sitting on stage before a performance, we might not want to be moving a great deal through space, but nor do we want to hold ourselves still. So sometimes I use the very simple analogy in a car, the difference between park, which you can kind of feel locks the wheels in and prevents movement, and neutral. Neutral in a car, you could indeed move the car if you gave it some force, but it's not necessarily moving through space, but it's not locked. So it's that unlocked availability for movement that's so important. And in sitting, I'm going to push back just so you can see my torso. we want to find the rockers of our sit bones. One way to do that is to sit right on your hands, and you want to make sure that you're sitting in a comfortable range on top of your sit bones. A lot of times when people get into trouble and get uncomfortable is when they go way on the back of those rockers like that, and you can see that makes me slump. Now, if you are eager to overcorrect, like many of us, you might think the way to fix that is to push your low back forward and sit on the very front of your sit bones. But that hurts my back and makes it difficult to breathe. And so if I can, instead of pushing from my low back, actually rock on my rockers like I'm on a rocking chair, and then look for the place where my head is easily balancing over somewhere in the middle will be full height. So if I slumped back on the back of my rockers, I'll lose height. And also if I push forward, it'll arch my back. And also, if you notice, that's not my full height. There's my full height. When I just let my head balance easily over the middle of my rockers. So no sitting still, and find your rockers, and then find your head over your rockers. Those are my 3 simple tips.
I like how you're sitting at the edge of your seat. I remember being in orchestra when I was growing up, and my teachers were always like, you need to sit at the edge of your seat because we're sitting on the sit bones there. Whereas if we're sitting at the back of the seat, we tend to kind of, it's harder to maintain that, and then we kind of slouch or something weird happens. So I liked how you were sitting at the edge of your seat. That reminded me of something that I try to do. Is that something we should all try to do?
Well, I'm going to say yes and no.
Okay.
Because as an Alexander teacher, the funny thing is I don't really want to make hard, fast rules. What I want to do is get you curious, and what I want you to do is tune into your own movement. So instead of trying to sit and imagine yourself as a freeze frame, which would be no movement, which would be park instead of neutral, I want you actually sensing, oh, where's the top of my sit bones? So the yes and no, it goes like this. You're absolutely right. The edge of the chair, usually has better support. A lot of chairs have kind of a dip in the middle, which would encourage us to slump and sit on the back of those rockers. So I'm also super short, and what I forgot to say is sitting with your feet flat on the floor is super important. So if I'm way back in the chair, my feet might not be able to reach all the way, yes? Or if I'm super tall, I might tuck my feet back, which might also send my head forward. So feet flat on the floor. And if you have to sit for a long time, you might not want to be at the edge of your chair because you might get tired. And so the back of the chair is certainly our friend. But if the back of the chair has your shoulders back like this, I put a pillow so my head can be right over my rockers. If the chair, like most chairs, is built with the shoulders behind your hips, you're going to need a little spacer. You need a pillow behind your ribs, not your low back, behind your ribs, to be a spacer so you can sit comfortably. So yes, it's a good idea, but it's not a hard, fast rule, especially if you're the person that's been overcorrecting like this. Sitting at the edge of the chair is actually going to aid that habit of overdoing. So my students that overarch their back, I encourage them to sit back in the chair because for them, that's a better choice. For my students that are slumpers like this, they do better at the edge of the chair. So I hope that helps clarify my answer.
That is interesting. I mean, we could go down this little spiral of Alexander technique tips, but my last little question in this vein perhaps is that do you find that it's helpful for people that have core strength to have better posture? Does that help at all to have that strength to hold ourselves up? Because so many of us actually don't, you know?
Well, that's such a great question, and I'm going to say again yes and no. So, of course, core strength is absolutely important. Again, as an Alexander teacher, for me, it's all about how you're achieving that. Yeah? And again, that can seem kind of subtle to my students at first, but here's the funny thing. When we're in good balance, we are going to start to use core strength. So if you're trying to achieve core strength by pulling into yourself, did you see me lose length?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm exaggerating, but a lot of times when people think about core strength, they're not thinking three-dimensionally. They're thinking like a dinner plate on their abdominal wall, and they're really over-efforting and making themselves tight and locked. So we're back in park again instead of neutral, and that long, lean, supple use of our core absolutely is going to aid postural support. But here's the funny thing. You come into postural balance, it's going to also aid your core strength. So only thinking about it in this very efforted way does more harm than good a lot of the time. And it's not that I'm opposed to core strength. It's that I really want to pay attention to how you're doing that, and that you're using that support in the context of your whole self, not just grunting down in this over-efforted way.
Right.
If you can't breathe when you're trying to engage your core, you've overdone it. Simple test.
That makes sense. That does make sense. You know what? That just made me think of a question that I wanted to ask you about poise and on stage presence, because all of us, when we get a little nervous, can kind of shallow breathe. But I wanted, before I forget to ask you this question, I think a lot of people are going to be intrigued about working with an Alexander Technique teacher. Is that something that's like a yoga class? Like, would you go to a group class? Do you work individually with people? And like, how many sessions would people have with you? And do you need to go if you're injured, or can you just go if you're a regular person?
Those are
So many
great
questions.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I think I got them all, but you'll keep me honest.
I'll try and keep you updated. Yeah.
So traditionally, when Alexander first was giving lessons, the only way people studied Alexander Technique was with what we call one-on-one individual lessons. And you can find Alexander lessons around the world. As a matter of fact, I'm about to fly to Germany for an international congress to meet 600 of my peers and colleagues from around the world, which I'm super excited about. So that's kind of what we call the classical approach. My mentor, Marge Barstow, was an innovator. I'm teaching a workshop about her innovations. She taught in groups. So I mostly learned in groups, like a yoga class. And now, because of the pandemic, as hard as it's been, I'm grateful because, boy, did it up my Zoom game. So I've got 4 classes a week on Zoom, and I created 2 online courses, one for people working from home and one for musicians, because there's a lot we can learn by changing our thinking, and you don't have to be in a physical room with someone to do that. When I am in a physical room with people, like I'm going to come to your studio in person, and we're excited to do that, I get to also use my hands. And my hands are another way to introduce information about your own movement. And so it's super gentle use of our hands to guide movement. And when I can't be in a room with someone and use my hands, I use my eyes and my ears to observe what's going on. And I use my words and my own movement to demonstrate and to lead movement that way. The good news about not being in a room with me is you have full agency. You know for sure you did that change on your own, because I'm not there. You did it. So there are pluses and minuses and useful things about either. But that, I think, was the first set of your questions.
Yeah, and so people can actually find your group classes and join things that you're doing from your website, right?
They can find it all on my website, and I've got an archive of class recordings going back 2+ years. So there's tons available on my website. Yeah, and some of
That's
it's free
great.
previews, so check it out. Yeah.
That,
Now
yes,
your
we
other
we'll all need to go there.
your other question is really interesting to me, because mostly people seek out Alexander Technique. There's, I would say, 2 main camps. There's people that have been injured and or compromised by disease or some set of circumstance, who want to regain their full functioning, right? Or to the best of their abilities. I work with lots of seniors. I've been with them for a long time. So I've seen them start to need walkers, and their mobility is compromised. They're in their 90s, reasonable enough. But it's a way that they have some agency about their own coordination, right? Or lots of people with neck and back injuries, or with musicians, it's repetitive strain injuries. There's just so much injury amongst musicians. And so we help people regain that functioning. And then the other camp, I would say, is performers and what I would call seekers. People who are curious about refining the very best of their functioning, whether it's for expressivity, if they're an artist, or just as a human being wanting fuller balance. You know, there's people that are just kind of seeking that mind-body balance. So those are the two primary camps. And Alexander teachers can help, no matter where you are in all of that. Coming into balance is a beautiful thing and can really help us. So I think that's the question.
Yeah. Would you say that Alexander technique, like, is it a form of physical therapy or is it different?
Right. So it can seem similar at times, but it's quite different. And there are some important differences to articulate. One is that as an Alexander teacher, I am not medically trained. Right? So unfortunately, that means health insurance won't cover it, which is really sad, because we can help people regain full functioning just like a physical therapist can, but we're using a different model. And it's not a medical model, it's an educational model. And frankly, we look systemically not at an elbow, for instance. If you come to me for tennis elbow, I am going to look at the functioning of your elbow as it relates to what you're doing with your hand, your shoulder, and your whole self. And I'm going to look at what you're doing when you're typing at a computer or swinging a tennis racket. I'm going to look at the context of the body part inside the whole system of movement, inside the system of all the activities you do in your life. Physical therapists are looking at your elbow. They know more than I do about the attachments and the insertions and right? I learned a lot of that and haven't used a lot of it. So they know more medically. They don't know what I know, and I don't know what they know. So it's a really good partnership, because a lot of physical therapy now is handing out those sheets of exercises. And in my opinion, there is not enough attention to the how. They give you the what. So I often will have my students bring me their physical therapy exercises. That's the content. I don't second guess someone's content. That's their expertise. My expertise is how you're doing those exercises, because here's the funny thing. A lot of injuries are set up by our misuse. If my head is forward as I sit at my computer 8 days a week, and then I go to reach or swing a tennis racket, I may overstretch those muscles because they're already living long and tight. They're already overstretched. If a physical therapist gives me an exercise and doesn't first address that misuse pattern, I am going to possibly injure myself more if I don't eradicate the underlying coordination problem that's either setting that up, right? It might be causing it or it might just be aiding it. Does that make sense? Did I just make sense?
Yeah, no, that does make sense, because our body is totally a tool that we use to interact with the world. And if we use the tool incorrectly, then we can injure the tool and we're just not being effective. We could do it better with less energy and effort, right?
Exactly.
That's neat. Gosh, I had a question to ask you, but I've forgotten it. So I know that we don't have all the time in the world, but the question was, just real quick, do you find that some of your clients actually improve in their mental health at all just by their posture changing? Because if we're slouching forward and interacting in the world in a hunched over way, which we don't even possibly realize that we are, right? Doesn't our whole outlook and our body reflect that in some way?
Absolutely. It's the thing that I just cherish about this work. What we're doing is we're really attending to the whole system. How we think affects how we move, and how we move affects how we think. So we can enter that system by changing how we think. We might call that mindset, right? Or we can physically learn to undo those straining patterns, which is going to start to undo the straining habits of our thought process. So this is very much related to performance anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
Because I realized the darndest thing years ago is when my students talked about their anxiousness, and it was startling to me that it wasn't just about performing. I understand performance anxiety. I performed on stage for 30 years. I know what that's like to walk into an audition or walk on stage. I butterflies, and for dancers it's a wobbly leg. For musicians it's usually more about shallow breath and trembling fingers. Yes, but I get it. Yes. But here's the funny thing. I started noticing with my conservatory students, first of all, they're anxious about their lessons, not with you.
Darn.
With their conservatory, the pressure is really big. And when my students were like, I'm more nervous about my lessons than being on stage, I was like, wow, that was news to me. I just didn't understand. So here's the funny thing. This is what I noticed. With remarkable consistency, when my students tell me about an upcoming lesson or audition or performance, they start contracting in. They see in, they pull in, they talk about being nervous as if they're inside their tortoise shell. If you can imagine a tortoise going into their shell. And then you can see, right? You can see the hyperventilation and the tightness, right? And so I started experimenting with my students in what I call connecting out. So that's changing our thinking, isn't it? So instead of like, oh, they're not there, I'm not performing, I'm like, no. The reason why you spent hours and hours and hours practicing and rehearsing was because performers are generous. Performance is a generous act. It's sharing. So put someone you love at the end of the hall or in the next room or across the street, however you'd like to do that in your imagination, and share. So connect out. Imagine someone you love way at the end of the hall and play for them, which gets their gaze up and out. And when your gaze moves, your head moves. And when your head moves, your body can follow. That starts to allow room for breathing, because this is, you've tightened you. It's very hard to get air in, right? So you're trying to get yourself not to breathe shallowly by pushing air low. Well, no, you need to make room. So by simply changing how we think and deciding to share our music to the end of the hall can help reverse that shortening, tightening, anxious habit. And you might still be nervous, but it won't feel quite the same because you're not moving in the same way. And when you change how you move, it's going to change how it feels.
Yeah. You know, I love how you use that. You use the thought of connecting with somebody in the audience, because as musicians, we're communicating something, and sometimes we get too like focus on ourselves and our own fears, but it actually has nothing to do with us.
Yes,
Like, right?
your violin doesn't care if you communicate with it. Sorry. I mean, I know
Right.
you love the violin, but, right, the violin is your partner to communicate to the world. Even if you're communicating through a Zoom screen or a microphone, that Zoom screen is just a tool to connect to a world. And the world is not in here. I connect out.
And that helps the mind to the head to rise, and everything that you had explained, the body posture changes and the presence changes and the breathing lengthens. And it would be so fun to have you come back and talk more about all these things. I know we just kind of scratched the surface, but I'm so grateful to talk to you today. Is there anything that you wanted to say before we kind of wrap up and let people go about their day?
Yeah, I guess I would just like to finish by saying I think part of the gift of the tool of Alexander's discoveries is we really get to be curious about our own potential. That so often people think, I have a bad shoulder, my back is bad, I'm not good at vibrato, I'm not fast, or I'm not whatever. And we put limits on ourselves. And sometimes other people help do that and tell us we're not very good, or they try to prescribe our potential for us. And so what I want to say is, I don't know what your potential is. I don't know what my potential is, but let's have some fun exploring and discovering. So I don't give up easy.
That sounds like a plan. Well, Ariel, I hope you have a magical trip to
Mm.
Germany. That's awesome. It's so fun. What is that called? I'm curious what it's called.
So it's the 12th International Alexander Technique Congress happening in Berlin, August 22nd to 28th.
And do you have social media? Like, can people follow you and see what you're up to there?
Absolutely. I'll be posting about my workshops there. And let's see, my Instagram is lowercase a t underscore Phila, Phila. And my Facebook page is Alexander Technique Philadelphia, all spelled out. And I want to make a special invitation to your students in your community. I have a Facebook group just for musicians, and my Facebook group is free and open to all. And the Facebook group is Move Free, Play Free.
Well, I'll link all of those below for all of us. That way we can connect with you and see what you're up to. And as always, it's so fun to connect with you and to know you and to learn from you. And I can't wait to see you back with the studio in September and for our other future events together. So if anyone from the YouTube community would like to join some of our little gatherings too, just check out my website, which is violinviolamasterclass.com. And just once again, Ariel, thank you so very much for being with us today and for letting me interview with for you. I was so excited and nervous. I don't know if you could tell. It's just the first one, so hopefully I'll get a little bit
Give
better
a
with
round of
time. But
applause. It was a
thank you.
pleasure. Thanks, Amber.
All right, Ariel, you
Okay.
take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.